I wanted to start out by finding out how many people are thinking about going into journalism. 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay, so maybe some of you will make you happy that you are not going into journalism, and some of you maybe I'll convince you to change your mind. But I'm glad that we do have a few people who are considering it at this point. I think that going into journalism today is a pretty brave move. It's a very different kind of move from the one that I took about 20 years ago when I started dabbling in journalism. I graduated from college and moved to DC and worked as an intern in a media outlet, and I had this dream of becoming a foreign correspondent. Thinking about how I thought about journalism then and how it is now, I never could have anticipated that White House correspondents would be called names like loser and a terrible person by the president, that the president would call the media the enemy of the people, and that according to one poll, 30% of the American population would agree with him. I wouldn't have anticipated what Gallup polls have been telling us. In '76, the trust rate in the media was 74%. 40 years later, 2016, it was somewhere in the 30s. It's actually crawled back up a little bit since then, but maybe it's like just over a majority of the US population apparently trusts the media. It's kind of a difficult thing to discuss because obviously the media is a lot of different things, but the concept of the media, the whole public perception has changed so much, and I think that's made the job extremely difficult. So I think people are particularly brave going into the field right now. There are a number of other reasons why it's a brave thing to do, and I'm going to get to the positives later, but when I was getting into journalism, I had no idea that all these opportunities would be closing, all these doors of opportunities would be closing. The internet had been kind of just out a few years, and I think a couple of years before then I had learned what email was. And the writing was on the wall. People understood that this was going to drastically change what journalism was, but we had just absolutely no idea how destructive it was going to be to what journalism was. So I was lucky enough, in 2003, I was able to fulfill my dream of becoming a foreign correspondent. I moved to Haiti. I worked for Reuters and the Haitian Times, and then later I worked for AP. And then I did a ton of freelancing over a couple of years from Haiti. Almost every opportunity I had at that time stopped existing at some point. So Reuters and AP, I don't think that they have full-time correspondents in Haiti now. AP closed their Caribbean bureau in Puerto Rico. They no longer have correspondents across the region, which is especially a shame because there are so many newspapers that are dependent on wire services now, and so sort of the cutbacks have been everywhere, and it's been particularly challenging. I did some freelancing for the Boston Globe. Then the Boston Globe closed their foreign bureau. Baltimore Sun closed the foreign bureau, McClatchy papers, like everybody was just this sort of huge sweep of closing their foreign desks and sort of calling home their foreign correspondents. There was a general pressure on the world of media, and I guess you all know about this, but just sort of the rise of digital meant that it was killing ad sales for a lot of outlets. But it was particularly hard for foreign correspondents because it's more expensive, and also for local news outlets, because when things went digital, advertisers demanded as big an audience as possible, and that meant a national audience. And so there was all this local coverage that just wasn't happening anymore. So then there was a rise, like the one place where there was some good news was in digital jobs, and there was digital funding, and digital jobs were on the rise, but it's not nearly enough to make up for the rest of the media world. So newsroom jobs have fallen, I think maybe by like a quarter over the last few years. So what other good news do I have for you about the world of media? I mean, another problem is just that people have been doing things on the cheap. So, I mean, now, of course, we're talking about the shrinking of so many jobs and so much funding, but of course there's just this huge amount of information out there that just didn't exist. We never could have imagined a few decades ago. The problem is that everybody's most outlets are doing things on the cheap. So that means inexperienced reporters working with overstretched editors and no fact checkers under time constraints, and inevitably there are some inaccuracies, and so to some degree there is good reason for people to be distrustful of the media these days. Fortunately, there's also a rise in fact-checking sites and sections of newspapers that do fact-checking, and that's really great. Skepticism, antipathy toward the media goes beyond healthy skepticism, though, and it can be dangerous, as when a gunman entered a newsroom in Annapolis, Maryland last summer, and the mysterious packages that have shown up at CNN and other news outlets just last month. So this is the negative stuff. I'm going to try to convince some unconvinced people that journalism actually is a really great field to get into. It's just not for the faint of heart, is the point that I've been trying to drive home. For the vast majority, for that average US-based reporter, there is not a great risk of physical harm. But there has been a lot in the news lately about journalists being targeted. In most other countries, there's not a great risk, but there are obviously exceptions. There are also really great things about being a journalist. I don't know, can the people who are considering journalism, can you talk about what kind you're thinking about going into? In particular, like medium or topic?
I am gonna probably go into photojournalism.
Oh, awesome. And any particular subject matter? Anybody else?
So sports, but focusing on baseball.
And photo or writing or?
Writing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, probably going to go into the investigative journalism side of things.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then maybe move my way up to broadcasting.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because journalism, I know I wouldn't expect anybody to be fully decided at this point. It's so much in flux right now, so by the time you're really making your way through the field, there could be so many things that are available that aren't available now. There are generally these days far fewer just formal jobs than there used to be, but there are so many more opportunities for breaking in because of the small staffs at a lot of the outlets. They're heavily dependent on freelancers, and they really want new voices. So people are, if you have good writing skills, you can be compelling, you can, even as a photographer, just to be able to convince people, but of course being able to show excellent work can convince editors to consider you even if you have zero experience or you're just starting out. But new voices is a big theme. The news media has diversified a ton. It still has a long way to go, but there is an effort. It used to be almost entirely white male, and it used to be this sort of authoritative, at least in broadcast, really, this sort of stodgy, authoritative voice. Now in broadcast, at least in radio, it's been sort of replaced by like the geek next door, Ira Glass. I don't know if you guys listen to This American Life or Radio Lab, but there's a little bit of a kind of geeky, inquisitive guy template, but there's just a lot more different kinds of voices, people with different kinds of backgrounds entering into the scene. There's NPR and the New York Times both just like a week ago announced new internships for new voices, for more diverse young people coming into their newsrooms. So there are opportunities that are opening up, but it's also a world now for people to just create, you clear your own path. So, the podcasting world in the Boston area is just so interesting because we have this big radio scene with these two big NPR stations and then a lot of college radio stations, but also there's the podcast garage where they have all kinds of classes that you can take on podcasting, and you can rent a studio, and they inform people, they and other organizations in the area inform people about the grants and fellowships that you can apply for, how to get funding for a podcast. So it's a time for people to come up with their own ideas, do something totally new and different, and just hunt around for funding, for takers, for publishers. And one thing I really like about journalism is, unlike a lot of other fields, it's very collaborative. And so if you network, if you meet other journalists, most of the journalist gigs that I've gotten have been from other journalists. Like an editor will call a reporter and say, hey, can you do this work for me? And they say, I'm not available, but I know somebody else who might be. And so just knowing other people sort of doing the same thing that you're doing, it's not a matter of competition. You want to have friends with people who are doing what you're doing because you share gigs, you share contacts. Often, especially when people are creating new podcasts or new outlets or websites, people want to collaborate. They want a co-host, or they want an editor, or promoter, or somebody to help with the website. I mean, it's this big sort of, I don't know, it's like a big party now. It's not like knocking on the door of a big scary building and trying to get in and kind of into a fixed job. There's still some of that. But it's a very creative world. It's a world now where if you've got grit, you can really go places. So if you're okay with uncertainty and love excitement and adventure, then I would recommend it. And I'm just wondering, like, I would love to hear questions or comments from people. Yeah.
So I'm Haitian. So when
okay.
you were in Haiti, like, what parts did you live in?
Well, I moved to Port-au-Prince in 2003, and I lived in Port-au-Prince, but I sort of went all over. So, and that was a really long time ago, 2003 to 2005, and I've been going back ever since.
Yeah,
just
because
every few
now
months.
it's like way different in like Port-au-Prince. Like it's like just like that whole area from like the airport down is just like crazy.
Is that where you're from, or where your family's from?
So my family's from Cape Haitian, so like like Ocap, like that area. But our beach house is like an hour away, like from Port-au-Prince. So we have to like drive through all of like the poverty and like the destruction, like see everything. Like it's really like disheartening to see, especially with like the children. Like this boy, when we stopped on the side of the road like to buy food, this boy was like begging for money and said like his mom died from the earthquake, his dad went to DR, so it's like him and like his brother, and he was 10. And he walked like an hour and a half every day just to like beg for food for him and like his brother. So like it was really sad.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable stories everywhere. And and especially, I mean, you've seen the change, and your parents have seen a ton of change, and I know for a lot of people it's just incredibly painful to go back and see it's not the home that they remembered. So and I know Cap Haitien has changed a ton too.
Yeah.
I know that there's some hope of some nice developments there, but
not on like the like inside like deep Haiti, like in like Port-au-Prince, like how they have like all like those houses just like stacked up on each other. I don't think that'll ever change because it's like a lot of corruption, but like the island parts and like the beach parts, you've probably seen like they're beautiful.
And what do you feel you would like people to understand more about Haiti, like Americans? I
mean, I feel like a lot of people have like a stereotype towards it, just kind of like even like before like the earthquake, but like being there and like being able to see like the poverty side, but also like if like Haiti had help, it could be amazing, because like it had once all of the resources, not as much anymore, because like from the French government stuff like that. But like I feel like if it had help and like the proper like stability it needed, like it could be amazing.
Do you ever think about writing about it?
No.
No?
I really know.
Anyone else? Yeah.
What made you choose the foreign side of it rather than homegrown?
Because I had done some traveling, like I had gone to Peru with a group of geologists and just spent some time on my own going around Lima. And at one point I remember thinking, God, there's so much, just talking to taxi drivers, like there's so much here that's so fascinating, and I would love to be able to kind of be on a mission here to just get paid to be curious. And that's basically, I mean, that's, I think when I've gotten this sort of high from the journalism experience, it's like I can't believe I'm being paid to go hang out in Paris and interview people about religion. It's just kind of like, it's the ultimate sense of adventure. But I also think a lot about, I mean, Boston's an incredibly diverse international place, and why don't I just do international stories from Boston? I mean, I think And like the Boston Globe, a lot of outlets that have gotten rid of their foreign bureaus or aren't using foreign correspondents anymore, they send their local staff overseas, and the Boston Globe has done that, and WBUR has done that. And sometimes there's just more and more there links between what's happening locally and what's happening elsewhere, and I think that's a great thing to do. I also think, I sort of feel more sad in the kind of decline of the media outlets. I kind of feel more sad about the decline of local reporting and local papers, because that just seems so crucial to me. And often I think it's having sort of eyes and ears on the ground, people really getting to know their neighborhood, that they're going to find out about some of the big national and international stories. So yeah, even though it was just, I think it's a very kind of big, shiny object kind of situation with international reporting. You want to go somewhere exciting and new and glamorous. There are exciting and new and glamorous places right around the corner all the time. So, does it interest you at all?
I've thought about it, but I did a little bit of it in high school, and it just never really piqued my interest.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Where do you plan on going next?
So I went to Guatemala a couple of times on reporting trips, and I kind of fell in love with the place. I thought there were some really interesting issues, and I ran into somebody the other day who were talking about it. And I was like, yeah, I have to get back, because there's some, I think mineral extraction is a really interesting topic in Guatemala, so I might try to get back there. It's a lot easier. I think it's like when you've already been to a place, it's a lot easier to convince editors and grant givers to send you back, because at least you've kind of done the reconnaissance and you can develop a good pitch. But I wouldn't mind anyone just sending me to some random place too. Where would you want to go?
I don't know.
No interest in journalism for you?
I don't know. I like to travel a lot. So.
Uh-huh. So what are most people here thinking about going into, if anything?
Advertising.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Entertainment.
Okay. What kind of entertainment?
I really want to work at Nickelodeon and that stuff, whether it's like writing and stuff, or just working at TV shows.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, writing skills can get you far in a lot of fields. Anyone else? Uh-huh.
Visual or digital marketing.
Mm-hmm. Are a lot of people going into market or thinking about marketing? No, just a couple. Other kinds of communication?
I want to do sports communications. I want to be a broadcaster. So I'll put that way an analyst.
Uh-huh. Sports?
Public relation.
Uh-huh. For sports or?
Kinda, yeah. Whatever. I don't really know yet, but probably sports.
And sports for you?
Yeah.
I know a lot of journalists who have gone into communications. I think at some point that they've gotten pretty discouraged with the world of the instability of the world of journalism, and then they've worked in communications in really interesting organizations. I'm not so sure about going the other way. It would be interesting to know. Any other? Yeah.
So I know you do mostly foreign, but has the changes in the media since the 2016 election, how has that changed your own journalism? And has it at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's made me pretty cynical. As you mentioned, so when I was in grad school, I went back to grad school pretty recently, and to study international relations. And so I did my thesis on the detention of asylum seekers and how detaining asylum seekers actually makes it a lot harder for them to get asylum. So they're at a severe disadvantage. And so I was making this whole argument about how it's in violation of U.S. law and in violation of international law and norms and human rights. And so then I was kind of doing some journalistic versions of this thesis, or I was trying to after graduating, and now it seems like people just don't care. So I realized, I think, getting into the nuances, kind of trying to prove a point like that, a lot of the time you just have to get people in the gut, and so I think that I was, maybe what has changed is being less intellectual and more visceral in my thinking. So I think especially when there's been so much talk about a really divided country and people trying to reach each other and understand each other, Generally, the way they do that is just by having friends with different views, and just it's by proximity and kind of just a sense of understanding that you can't really explicitly explain. Is that me? So, yeah, that's me. I mean, it's just, I think so much has changed in newsrooms over the last couple of years, just conversations that people are constantly having of like, how do we work with the government now, and how do we cover the government, and I mean, especially the executive. How much opinion can we express? And I think a lot of people I know have gone from trying to be really unbiased to just being like, oh, I don't care anymore, I'm just going to express my opinions. So there's been a lot of talk since those comments that I mentioned coming out of the White House at the press conference. There's been a lot of talk about, like, should we boycott these press conferences if journalists are going to be treated this way? And people I know sort of in the kind of Twitter and email spheres are pretty divided on it. Yeah.
When the media is under attack or very like heavily criticized, does that affect you in any way? Like as a journalist, like does that make you think, am I like, you know what I mean? Like does it ever bring you down or anything like that, or motivate you to like be and do and say like the right type of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that maybe more than being under attack, I think I feel down and kind of discouraged when I just think that people don't believe the media or value it. So, and I think when the idea of truth becomes, seems so mushy that people just kind of decide what their own truth is. So, yeah, I think if, maybe less than people saying, I don't like the media or something, but maybe behind the not liking is a sense of not believing. You want to feel like your hard work is being valued, I guess. Yeah. Yes?
Could you tell me the importance of being a multimedia journalist?
Oh God, unfortunately it's so important now. I think in the last couple of years there's been this sense, a lot of news outlets suddenly think that they should get you to do 2 or 3 times as much as you were doing before for the same pay. So I only have 2 hands, and I try to explain this. Like, I can hold a microphone and then the recorder, and it's hard to also hold a camera, and then it's really hard to also hold a video camera, but it's hard to get that to sort of convince editors that that's a serious limitation. But sometimes, I'll do a little audio recording, and then I'll put that down, and then I'll pick up the visual stuff. I always urge people to hire a photographer to work with me, but often it's just, everybody wants to do things on the cheap now, so there's a lot of juggling that goes on.
So Amy, just to elaborate on that, I remember we had a conversation about skills that you felt you had to pick up along the way, and courses I think that you may have taken, or certificates. Could you elaborate on that? So digital skills? Yeah,
so I mean, that said, I always try to get editors to hire, or news outlets to hire a photographer for me to work with. But if they just refuse, then I always want to be able to say, okay, I'm capable of taking photos, and like, here are some samples of photos that I've taken. So being able to kind of sell that package. And video, I mean, it's definitely nice to have that in your back pocket. I mean, just when you're applying for jobs or pitching stories, to be able to say, sure, if you think that having video would be really important and bring this thing to life. I mean, I learned just on a little flip cam, which actually, I don't know if they even sell these things anymore. But even, I mean, God, like when the last time I was in Haiti, it was last year, and I was working with this young journalist who works at a radio station there. I mean, this is Haiti, which isn't nearly as advanced journalistically as the US normally, but this was, this young guy. He was able to do everything on his iPhone, and I was so envious. Like, we would go and interview people together, and he would just, he would take a video of an interview, and then we're just driving somewhere, and while we're driving, he's editing the video, and he's putting in captions and everything, and he just sends it off to his radio station, which also has a website. And so that's pretty awesome. So it's, yeah, you don't even have to carry big clunky equipment around. And some outlets might poo-poo the idea of doing everything on your iPhone, but I've certainly seen, you know, people doing it for radio too, just for the audio, and then doing the audio editing on their iPhone. So I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, as far as courses, like if you're interested in radio, there's something called Transom. You can go to the Transom website, and they just have so many really useful tips, even for people who are experienced radio journalists, just like, oh yeah, like what levels should this kind of recorder be at, and where should I hold the microphone? And then at the Podcast Garage, they're always having courses. Mediabistro.com is a great resource because you can find potential employers, and you could get advice on pitching different outlets there. And they also have webinars. There's so many webinars. And then, yeah, I think, and we talked before, I think just having language skills is huge. I mean, especially, you know, if you want to cover migration or international sports matches, or anything international, anything neighborhood, because there's so many different languages that you're going to hear, and it's just, I mean, when Dana and I were in Berlin together and working on a project with a photographer, and it was so great because everybody spoke English, but they don't speak English to each other, and so not being able to speak German, it's like there was actually, Dana had just left, I guess, and there was this terror attack that happened. There was a truck that went into this Christmas market, and I was getting phone calls, and people were asking me what people on the street were saying. I had no idea. I mean, I could ask people about what their response was to this attack, but you want to know just kind of what the general vibe is on the street, and you want to be able to pick up any newspaper and read it. And so language skills are so key and such a great door opener for anything, I think, but especially in journalism. Yeah. So
what is like your, a very broad question, what is your favorite part of your job? Like what do you love doing? And what is like some of the struggles that come with your job too?
Those are great questions. I think the great part, I think it's kind of the beginning of something. It's kind of like, I mean, it's a little bit like hunting, I guess. Like you come up with an idea, something you want to go for, and then you're hunting for outlets to pick up your stuff, and it's great when you get somebody to say yes, and especially like, we'll send you somewhere, we'll fund your reporting, and we'll take your story. That's great, and but also just in the digging, like finding, every time you find a new and interesting person who consents to be interviewed, or just being in some totally random new place. You're on some little dirt road in the middle of some place that you never knew existed. It's that kind of getting somewhere and not knowing where you're getting. The hardest part, I think, for me and for a lot of people I've talked to, is you come home, and I don't do a lot of breaking news, so often it's like gathering a lot of audio or something overseas, and then I come home and then I spend a long time putting it together. That can be pretty daunting and challenging, especially if you have like hours and hours of tape to go through. So I think that's one of the hardest things, and getting rejected. I mean, there's so much rejection, and it's great because I've seen other journalists on Twitter posting all the rejections that they had gotten over a year for fellowships and grants, and it's just, you know, makes other journalists love them because they can commiserate. So, yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
The highs and lows. It's a roller coaster,
Yeah,
definitely.
for
I mean, freelancing is, you know, not all journalism is like that, but freelancing is.
What was journalism always like your kind of priority, or did you ever think about any other concentrations?
At one point, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and sometimes I think maybe I should have done that, so like an immigration lawyer or human rights lawyer. So, and as it turns out, I just interview a lot of them.
Yeah.
So, but I think that they work a lot harder than I do. But my concentration, I mean, there was no journalism concentration in my school, so I studied political science.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you work completely freelance right now? You don't work under any like?
No. No, so I have semi-regular gigs. Like there's one radio program that I just come in from time to time, and I do production work in-house, and but it's irregular. So yeah. So what's that?
I said that's fun though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's great to be able to like connect with other people. and actually be paid for your hour rather than for your product. So yeah, I mean, I think that most freelancers I know who are able to make it as freelancers, they have some regular gig or somewhat regular gig, or they might even have like a part-time job that might even have nothing to do with journalism. It's really nice to have that to fall back on.
I was going to ask, because I know you've done a lot of reporting on migrants, migration in different locations or detention asylums. What some of the obstacles have been in trying to get, those are difficult stories, in trying to get information from people or just on the ground, things you've run into that you didn't expect or?
Well, I told you about a big challenge when I went to Canada last year, and I was reporting on Haitians who had just, partly because they had just heard that TPS was going to be canceled, were crossing the border into Canada to seek asylum there, and everybody had been told, don't talk to journalists. And so that was one of those moments where you think you're like, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to all these people and everything's going to be great, and then it's just this sort of stonewall situation. And then eventually it was sort of like you go around and you talk to friends of friends of friends of friends, and then you wind up in somebody's living room and you're having a really great in-depth conversation with somebody. And I think the trap there that journalists have to be careful of is if you're trying so hard to get access and you finally are able to get access, when is it too much? So then you have to be careful about revealing too much about somebody that might put them in danger or jeopardize their chances of getting asylum. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I know you've worried about putting people in danger a lot too by the stuff that you write. Maybe you can say something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, if you're reporting on people who are seeking asylum or migrating illegally or, just might be in a precarious situation, I found that so often people don't understand who you are. They don't understand American journalism. I think there's a big responsibility for journalists to protect their sources, because often editors don't care or they don't know it's an issue. And so I have no idea if I've been doing things right or wrong. Sometimes people really want to get the word out about what they're going through, and it's hard to get the word out about their personal situation and in a way that's very human and very detailed without putting them in some kind of danger. So it's a tough balance. It's a case-by-case decision situation. Yeah.
Have you ever been in a dangerous situation due to being a journalist in like another country?
You might have remembered in 2003 and 2004 in Haiti, it was a pretty hairy situation, and so the lead up to the ouster of Aristide, and let's see. I mean, I think that so often you're just chasing, what bleeds leads, and that was told very explicit to me by the people who I was working for at Reuters. So you go where things are bleeding, and so I would go. There were a lot of demonstrations, and so I would go to demonstrations, and then suddenly there would be shooting, and so you're hiding. I put myself in less danger than a lot of the photographers did. I was amazed. I mean, shooting would start and I would be hiding somewhere, and then I would go and talk to a photographer, and they'd say, the bullet was coming from over there and going over. It was almost like the world would slow down for them. And I know, fortunately, none of the photographers who I've known well have died in doing their work, but I look at some of the photos that they take, and it's just like, I can't, they're obviously in the crossfire. So I've ducked out of really dangerous situations, but I've definitely kind of put myself in settings that have been very tough. And there was one time I remember working for AP, and I was going into a neighborhood, and I really wanted to see what was going on. I think it was UN peacekeepers were battling it out with some gang members, and they stopped me from going in, and the editor said something like, you'll go in there and the article you want to write won't get written. Like, you go in there and you get shot, The article you want to write won't get written. There'll be a really nice little obit in the paper, but you'll be dead. And so I think people talk about the heroism of many reporters in Syria and a lot of other war zones, and I think that they are heroic for covering wars that need to be covered, but so often you really need to stop and consider, is this story worth dying for? And I think it's very rare that it is, and I never felt like there was a story that I was willing to die for. Mm-hmm.
So I teach media literacy, which is our capstone course, and today we were kind of talking about violence in the media, and one of my journalism students brought up, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, and she was talking
brought up what?
Brought up how you mentioned if it bleeds, it leads, and she was talking about how she's kind of having this internal crisis right now because she wants to go into journalism. Like, she loves what she does, she loves reporting, she loves all the aspects of it, but sometimes it's kind of depressing. It makes her really sad of the violence and everything that's going on in the world and having to cover all of that. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to sort of how you deal with that.
I don't know. I mean, I keep finding myself like, oh God, I really need to take some time off the news. It's too depressing. And then I'm like, oh God, I'm a journalist. I can't do that. It's really hard. I mean, I think the thing to do, and what I try to do, is sometimes focus on the positive of some story. So there's this really horrible thing going on, but there's always some really cool, kick-ass person doing amazing work trying to address the issue. And some of the stories, I mean, and I think that sometimes in journalism there's this pressure, there's this idea, not just that what bleeds leads, but also that real serious, hard-hitting journalism is negative, and it's all kind of talking about kind of deconstructing some, you know, taking down the powers that be, and just sort of, just pointing out all the negative. But I think that the stories that I felt the best about have been when I've kind of dug into a situation and found like that gem, that person who's doing heroic work, and then somehow it feels more, sometimes it can feel more truthful. I mean, like if you can tell it's not a fluff story. You might talk about whatever flaws they might have or something, but it's a saving grace, I think. I mean, I talk about, like, every time I go to Haiti, I'm like, okay, when I come back, I'm going to go to Carnival. I'm going to time it so that I'm going to be there for Carnival, because it makes me so happy. It's like such a beautiful thing. So, or spend some time at the beach or something. And I mean, even if a story doesn't come out of it, at least it's kind of like, okay, there's hope in the world, even if I'm doing a lot of really dark stuff on my days. Yeah.
So, being a journalist and, you know, media being online now and, like, you know, all that stuff, social media, do you ever feel like you never stop working? Like, is there a work-life balance, or is it constantly, like, you know, all work?
I'm pretty good at not working. I'm probably too good at not working. I mean, when I really love a story and I'm really caught up in it, then I will be on it nonstop. And definitely sometimes when I travel, it's like, you know, I don't have any other life. I don't have any family or anything there. So I'll work really long hours. But when I'm here, I really want to go for a run in the afternoon and have a drink with friends. And so, which probably makes me a much not very efficient freelancer, but I know a lot of people who, it's this kind of nonstop thing, and then they burn out, and then they find something outside of journalism. Right? Yeah.
What's been your most memorable interview?
Oh my God.
Or a favorite?
That is so hard. I should have planned for a question like that. I don't know. What did that say?
Nothing that can be repeated.
I think kind of just going along with the answer to your previous question, after Hurricane Matthew in Haiti a couple of years ago, I was going through this area of just complete destruction. It looked like a tornado had come through and just everything was leveled. And I just said, hey, let's stop at some random place and just talk to people. And there was this woman, and I just talked to a crowd of people, and they said, oh yeah, this woman, Madame, I can't remember her name, she's hooking up our water pipes, and she's bringing us clothes, and she's been sheltering us at her house, and like this one woman was doing all this amazing stuff. And so finally I met this woman, and I just had my tape recorder going the whole time. So I started talking to these people, and then the woman came up, and she was just like warm, just exuded this amazing energy, and just following her around, and she took me to some person who she was treating, who had wounded herself, and showed me where like 100 people were sleeping in her living room. And so I think that was just, it was a total surprise, and I was just compelled, and the interview just kind of wrote itself. I didn't have to do any work. So yeah, I think that was one that I really liked. Good question. You guys ask a lot of good questions for non-journalists. Yeah.
With the move to like more digital journalism, have you thought of like starting your own like YouTube channel or something?
YouTube channel, wow.
Young enough for that kind of thing.
No, I think, it's funny. I've only done a teeny bit of video, but I'm more in the audio world. And so I thought about doing a podcast. But it feels to me like getting a tattoo. Like it's such a big commitment. You really have to love whatever it is you decide to do. But I'm just like, I'm part of this group called Sonic Soiree, and every month we get together and we listen to audio, and it's all these audio geeks, and almost everybody there has their own podcast. So I think that, yeah, that's the one thing that I think about doing, but I haven't settled on the topic yet. I think it's hard to, like, in that case, you're really your own boss, and you could just spend all day working on minutia, and so you have to have a lot of discipline to do that. Why, are you thinking about a YouTube channel?
Potentially, yeah.
What would the theme be?
Anything kind of. Like I already have a channel, but like I'm restarting it. So just like anything really.
And you host, you interview people, or?
Sometimes.
But I hope you'll share. What's it called? How would we find it?
Well, I'm in the process of changing the name, but if you guys want to subscribe, the channel is called The Walkers.
The Walkers?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's look after the Walkers. Hi. Yeah.
So you say that you are like sent on expeditions for journalism, but sometimes they won't give you a cameraman, but even though you urge them to. Have you ever thought of hiring maybe someone there, wherever you're sent to?
Yeah, sometimes I do. I mean, if I have a budget for it. So, so when I took this trip to Canada last year, I worked with this organization called Long Reads, which actually pays quite well. And they said, okay, this is the chunk of money, and we expect you to pay a photographer out of this. But otherwise, it can be kind of a strain.
Have you ever thought of taking like an intern out of college who maybe be studying like photography or film, and taking them along with you?
That would be a good idea. They've got a good portfolio.
Just saying.
Yeah, how's your portfolio? Yeah. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Yeah. This isn't a question, just going back to what you were talking about doing a podcast. A lot of people do podcasts with like 2 people.
Yeah.
So if you like really wanted to do it, I don't know, I'm not telling you, like obviously you know what you're doing, but like having someone else would probably make a schedule a little easier. You feel a little more committed to it if it's not you by yourself.
Yeah,
I think podcasts are so fun, like you'd probably be good at it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a couple of people have approached me and asked me to do a podcast with them, and talking about, it's a commitment as it is, it almost felt like entering into a marriage or something, because you really, that's a very intense relationship. So I think when it works, yeah, I love listening to podcasts where there's that back and forth. It makes it so much more alive than just one person talking to the microphone. So, even if it's one person interviewing another person, I think it's still more dead than having this sort of banter of 2 people and then going to interviews. So, but yeah, no, that's a very good point, that it would take some of the load off. It's just a matter of, I guess if you network enough, you find people that you have the right chemistry and the right interest in. Are you going to do podcasts?
No, I listen to some sometimes.
Wait, which ones? Anything in particular?
Well, just some YouTubers that I watch. Like, I haven't in a while, but I was like really set on podcasts about a year ago that I would like listen to the same, like these YouTubers like make podcasts, and I would listen to that one. And then fashion ones sometimes.
So people do, like, that you're into YouTube. People watch a lot, mess around with it. Do you post stuff on it?
Yeah, but mine's more of an entertainment side.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot less
Yeah.
like normal news.
Uh-huh, okay. Yeah, it's just interesting because most people I know, I'm not in that YouTube world, so. Yeah.
So like my mom really likes politics, so like a lot of my childhood was like Keith Olbermann and like Rachel Maddow and you know, like all those people. And like now I've seen there's been like a shift where like they can say a fact, but yet it's seen as more of like an open-ended opinion type of thing, more versus just like the information at hand. So it's like, as a journalist, like how do you kind of try like to get your facts across when like now it's so easy for them to be like not be taken like as seriously, if that makes sense.
How do you get your facts across when they're not taken as seriously, when people see them as opinions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you just have to keep going. It's, you know that people are going to misconstrue what you report. I mean, the stuff that I've done, I mean, I've definitely messed up and I've done things that like, reports that I think in retrospect weren't very good, but the stuff that I've gotten the most criticism for has been numbers, so crowd numbers. And like when I was, particularly in Haiti, when, you know, there's an anti-government demonstration and you say how, like I would diligently go out and count like how many people are crossing this specific spot, and then I would talk to other reporters and how many people do you think there were? Oh, there's this other group of people over there that was disconnected from the demonstration. And I would put down the number that I thought was true. And inevitably, you know, somebody from some other country would be like, no, that's not right, because of their political leaning. And so I think it's, you know, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to frame my numbers differently, or I'm not going to change the numbers that I put out there. But sometimes it's just the hard facts that are going to piss people off, and there's nothing you can do about that except just keep sticking to the facts. And I think, I mean, I do think that a lot of the media has become a lot more opinionated, and it's such a shame because it just means that people do question the facts more. So even if they have really good, solid facts, then they call it into question.
There's like some like bias kind of.
Yeah, like, exactly. Yeah. That makes sense. So, and I think somebody like Rachel Maddow, I mean, she has a clear bias, but I think she also uses real facts. But I think her charm, like the reason people love her, is because of her bias. She's really punchy. I mean, her bias, but also her smarts and her facts. But I think that can also be dangerous. I mean, I would generally try to not seem like I'm clearly on one side of things in order to get it on the grass. Yeah.
Does the 24-hour news cycle make it difficult to do longer form journalism? You're talking about how you like would put together a piece and do a lot more work to put together a piece. So how does that affect?
Well, you can no longer do long form journalism about anything that's like breaking news. I mean, I remember it was like you would like learn the news by opening up the newspaper in the morning, and then there would be a long article explaining the whole thing. And that's just not possible anymore. But there's so much good reporting that's long form, that's like background or explanatory, and then stuff that's just really far from the news. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been surprised. Like on the one hand, people talk about people's attention spans getting shorter and shorter, but there are these long form podcasts coming out, and there's a bunch of online publications that are, I mean, like a publication called Long Form, but a number of these outlets, there's definitely a demand for long stuff that has something to do with what's going on in the news. It's just not quite breaking news anymore. So I have hope for it. Anybody else?
I have a general question. Having covered Haiti and other countries for years, what do you think when the story gets written by you and consumed by American audiences, what do you think gets lost in translation about what's actually happening on the ground?
So much. I mean, especially if you're working for wire services and it's like a short piece, it's half of the article is explaining what the country is in really simplistic terms. And then, God, I remember like doing stories. I would call in stories for wire services because I'd be out in the field and I wouldn't be able to actually write a story. And you would say there's this big demonstration and there were 3 people were throwing rocks. And then they would say, there was this big demonstration, hundreds of people throwing rocks. And so there are these sort of shorthands for things that end up just skewing the whole story. And you would say, you know, people at this demonstration were from this neighborhood, and then they're slum dwellers. I mean, they use, you know, really offensive terms will go in just because it's just seen as short and easy, and they have to sum things up really quickly. And so there's just, I think sometimes there's this idea that an American audience consumes things in a very simplistic way, and that's perpetuated. And especially with what leads, it's just, you know, if somebody wants to burn a tire to get attention, then that's somehow like considered news. If you have a photo of a burning tire, then it means like all hell is breaking loose, even if it's just one person who decides to go. So yeah, I think it gets really skewed, and I don't know how to change that. Yeah.
Have you got any interest at all or any intention at all of going down to try to cover what's happening with the caravan that Trump has demonized, and the border situation now with military who are down there without, you know, their families at Thanksgiving and so forth? It's a very volatile situation. Is that something you might be?
Well, you know, I mean, I haven't covered it because I feel like other people are covering it well. I don't know, and I think the thing about the caravan is, I totally understand why people are doing it. I think you're safer if you're traveling in a caravan, and I can understand maybe people want to make a point, but I think that the point that gets made is this invasion kind of thing, like, oh, there's this big mob and they're all coming up. And I think some of the reporting has been very useful. I think in the New York Times, like talking about, New York Times and NPR in particular, just talking about like how really awful it is, and the experiences that people are going through, and a lot of them are sick and they're walking with a fever, and the kind of conditions. It's not like a big party, and it's not like an army invading and they're far away, but somehow I think that if we have too much coverage, it might seem bigger than it is. So I don't know, and I guess the reporting I tend to do, it's kind of what other people aren't covering, and as a freelancer, I'm sort of going around the periphery rather than being sort of where other major and very competent journalists are.
And do you think, well, Trump has said about that caravan that there are Middle Eastern people, there are gang members, there are, and he's demonized it in a very, very, very evil way, and didn't acknowledge what you just said about people who are suffering and people who are traveling with children and so forth. What do you think the media's responsibility is to call him into account for unsubstantiated lies like that? I mean, it appears over and over again that excuse me, Trump is sending out tweets, and those tweets very often are lies, and the mainstream media is just repeating the tweets and not examining below that. I think it might go to what you said a few minutes ago about the short time span for coverage. Just there's a debate going on right now, is should journalists boycott Trump and boycott the White House because of what happened with Acosta?
Yeah.
Should they just say, you know, why are we broadcasting or printing these lies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, the thing is that, well, of course, Acosta tried to confront Trump about the caravan and why are you calling them a bunch of criminals without evidence and things like that. And then he just gets shot down and insulted and banned.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's tough because some people say, well, if you boycott, then it's just the right-wing media that's going to be there, and it's not a full boycott. It's and also that journalists shouldn't be activists in that way, and we should just keep going with our job just as well as we can. I mean, I'm full of admiration for people who go in and they take the abuse and then they just keep on going and they keep on asking the questions, and I kind of think that that's the way to go. And I mean, if people are shut down when they try to confront him, people can still report what he's saying and then do a fact check. And I think that that's one thing that, like the New York Times and Washington Post and other outlets have been doing a really good job of doing, is just, this is what he said, this is what we found. There's some truth in what he's saying. There's a lot of misinformation in there. I'm not sure that they're really using the word lies. Or, hey, so who is in the caravan after all? And, you know, yeah, there might be a lot of Middle Easterners in there. It doesn't mean that they're terrorists. There might be some people who have committed crimes before. It's just like these are regular people. And so I think just continuing to trudge along and still cover him, but cover him with a very critical eye is kind of the way to go, unfortunately. I mean, it is like it's kind of stomach turning to hear how journalists are insulted, and it's very tempting to really take action, I think, but I think that it's not our job.
Well, CNN did go to court and sued the White House this morning.
Yeah.
And they said that Trump violated Acosta's civil rights.
Yeah.
And
No, I mean, I think that's reasonable, yeah.
That trying to hold him accountable for these kinds of attacks on journalists and journalism. It's a real problem in undermining our democracy, I see. You know, that labeling journalists and media outlets as, you know, not telling the truth or as problematic, when in fact that's what he's doing, really undermines the whole concept of, you know, journalism in a democratic society.
Yeah.
It's very concerning.
But I think journalists need to be careful not to undermine themselves by overreacting to him too. I mean, I'm like, I think I've mentioned the New York Times like 5 times tonight. I'm a huge fan of the New York Times, and I just think that they do such amazing work. But there are times when I read some of, and the Washington Post, I read some of their articles, and I feel like, you know, this is going a little too, like, front page article, it's too much, like, going out of the way to pick apart Trump and talk about how awful he is. I think that I mean, there's so much to say about the lies that he tells, but I think that everybody needs to be really careful about just, you're gonna go, I mean, like Michelle Obama says, like, you know, he might go low, it doesn't mean that everybody else has to. Like, everyone can keep just kind of sticking to the facts as much as possible. Just getting socked in the face and turning the other cheek. That's what I think. Anyone else have any thoughts on? Yeah.
So since we were talking about Trump and specifically, why does the media only for the most part, mainstream media, focuses on all the negatives? Why don't they focus on positives? Because I would say, obviously there's some things that are positive, has to be. Why don't they focus on some of the positives?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there has been talk about the positive economy. I don't know. Yeah. Do you have any particular thoughts on what could be covered more positively?
I mean, obviously the economics. Not really specifically. Don't really want to get into any divisive comments or anything.
No. Yeah. I mean, and I didn't want to come in here.
I'm not trying to get into it.
Yeah. I didn't want to come in and bash Trump and have a political debate. But I mean, I do think, for example, with North Korea, I think maybe, I think there was so much skepticism about, and maybe with another president, people would have said, oh yeah, this is so exciting. Like, he set up this meeting with Kim Jong-un, and there seems to be progress very quickly. Perhaps the fact that Trump was so quick to talk about how great he was. I mean, just because he has this air of, like, look how great I am and look how much great stuff I'm doing, that maybe that partly calls for sort of the pushback, like, well, actually, you know, there's reason to be skeptical about this actually working. And then, of course, it does seem to have fallen apart. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it is a legitimate question, and I think that when it is all negative, that might account for some people feeling that they're less trustful of the news. Do other people think that the media is is too negative on Trump, that there are other positive things that they could point out?
Yeah, I think the positive things have been covered, but I think that when basic human rights are being denied, like, yeah, people are gonna cover that. Like, you can write a story on the economy, but then you can write 30 on everything else. So,
I think it's
I think the ratio is just, I mean, I don't wanna say my opinions so loudly, but I think that's just correct right now. So.
What are the outlets that people usually turn to for news?
It's usually just like everything. Like I'll be on Facebook and I'll have, I have a far right family. I'm not particularly far right, but I'll see articles all over. And some of my family members are like even kind of giving up on it too. Like
giving up on what? On being far right?
Yeah. My mom and my father are like, they're both right, but my mom's like a little bit more liberal, and my father's a lot more conservative. And like, it just feels like the far right is consuming so much media about like digging their heels in, and that my mom doesn't even like talk to my dad about politics that much anymore. Like none of our family really talks to my dad about politics anymore.
Do you see the media world as like there's the right-wing media and the left-wing media, or do you think that there's stuff that's just kind of giving
I
it
have
too
a hard
straight?
time seeing like, sometimes it's not hard considering like I'll see like Trump should die, I can tell what side that is, but I'll see some stuff that's like, what do we do after he's gone? Like after he's done, we can rebuild, or like, and it'll have things that I feel like apply to both sides. And it's more of just like after the split, we have to come back together at some point. And I can see that I see very few medias that don't have bias.
Yeah.
But it's refreshing.
It's refreshing when you do see something
without
that doesn't seem biased, yeah.
Just like kind of going completely off topic, like just totally random question. What do you think is the biggest skill you should have when being a journalist? Biggest, or like your skill set, you know what I mean?
Grit, I think, yeah. I mean, if you have absolutely no skill in any other area, it's hard, but I think if you're just really determined, I mean, when I was getting into radio, I was like, God, I really want to try radio. I'm back and forth between Boston and Haiti. There's this international news show in Boston. I really want to report for them. I think they're really cool. And I sent them an email, and maybe I sent them a few emails. I really showed my interest. And then I sent them some writing sample or some radio samples that I had done for Voice of America, which were pretty bad. And the editor that I sent it to, she meant to forward my samples to somebody else, to another editor, but she accidentally hit reply. And the note that went with the email was, this woman, she's back and forth between Boston and Haiti, she really wants to do reporting for us, but if you listen to the audio she's done, she's not ready for radio. And she was mortified that she realized that she had sent it to me by accident. But the thing was that she was totally unimpressed by the work I had done, but she was still willing to give me a chance. Like, okay, she's sort of positioned right, and she's really enthusiastic. Like, that was part of her email, that like she really wants to work for us. So I think, yeah, it's good to have writing skills. It's good to develop, I mean, audio, anyone can develop audio skills, I think. People can develop video skills, you know, anyone can do the basics, even though some people are going to be better than others. But just having that drive and determination and being able to take rejection, I think that's what's going to help you succeed the most. Any other questions or any other thoughts on like what news outlets are out there that people should consume? Yeah.
What's it like when you're publishing things online and you're getting comments back from strange corners of the world? You sort of mentioned this, like the criticism that can come to you. Do you have a tough skin about that?
Well, it's weird. I think something happened where a number of news outlets, I think they realized that like the comments section is so often just totally useless and abusive. I mean, it's just people getting in fights with each other. And so a lot of news outlets have just shut down the comment section altogether, or they've just gotten really good at moderating or screening out bad comments. So I feel like I don't see that much anymore, which is kind of a shame. I mean, I wish that there were some kind of like interesting responses, but I don't know. Yeah, I've had people feel maybe overexposed like people that I interviewed. I mean, now it's like we're at the point where most people that I interview are online and they're able to see the stories I do about them. And I think there's just like a sense of them kind of cringing when they read the article or heard it. I don't know, have I told you any good stories about interesting responses? I can't remember. Yeah, I mean, it was back, I think it was like back when I remember people being really critical about crowd numbers. It was like somebody would have a blog and then they would post my article and be like, typical stupid American article, getting the numbers wrong or whatever. So that kind of thing.
You've had some back and forth with people, like I remember you did something on the Commission of the Dominican Republic border,
yeah.
and then
Yeah.
like, direct from Dominican Republic, you get all this argument over what the Supreme Court statement actually, like,
Oh,
just,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
people
yeah, yeah.
who wouldn't let go.
Right, right. Yeah, no, there was somebody who was kind of stalking me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I think he tried to friend me on Facebook, but he kind of scared me at first, but we ended up having like a pretty good back and forth. I still wouldn't let him friend me on Facebook. But no, I want that. Like, I love the idea of having like a conversation, even if somebody seems a little bit intimidating at first. And with him, he used kind of violent language at first. He was scary at first, and then he kind of melted, like he just wanted to be listened to. And then when I did agree to engage with him, then we could get a good conversation going. More recently, there was a white supremacist who contacted me, who kept like stalking me on Facebook. And then he was talking about, he was like, well, I don't necessarily believe in white genocide, but something similar. And I thought for a long time about maybe responding, and he was just a little too scary, so I ended up blocking him in every way. But I still, like, I've talked about it with people, and some people are like, there are two camps. Some people are like, yeah, you should really engage, sometimes you hear these beautiful stories of people coming around, and they just need to connect and be convinced, and it was just too much for me at the time. Maybe I'll track him down. And
Sounds like a different job category. It sounds like counseling. Though.
Yeah. A couple more minutes. Do people have favorite news outlets? Yeah.
I like MSNBC. It kind of is like biased, I guess, in like a lot of ways, but I feel like I'm getting like factual information.
And do other people usually like get information from Facebook or Twitter or? And do you, when you get something from Facebook, do you just read what's on Facebook, or do you click a link to something else?
I usually don't go on Facebook, but you get like on your phone, like Twitter does a lot if you want to know anything that's going on, like if it's made or it's on the trending on Twitter, and then you can just look into it through there. But then if I want to go deeper, I would just go, to the internet, not stay on Twitter, because obviously. Also, now on your phone you just get like big news updates if it's something. If it's any type of big deal, you just get it, and then you could go deeper into it.
I just wanted to say something about headlines. So I know a lot of people who they're like, I can't take the news anymore, I just read the headlines. And I often find myself just reading headlines because I just don't have time to read the actual articles. But it also makes me cringe because when I write articles, it's always somebody else who writes the headline. They almost never accept my headline. They write something that's going to be clickbaity, and so often it's not accurate or it's misleading. And so I just always pray that when people see a headline for my article, then they're going to read the actual article and see what the real story is. So just a little warning about just reading the headlines. Often that's not the real story. So.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of news in the world constantly, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for not letting yourself become overwhelmed with it while still making sure you're informed? Because I find that I get exhausted by how much is happening and how much people are talking about it.
Yeah. What I personally do is something ridiculously old-fashioned, but I subscribe to the New York Times paper, and I actually read the paper. I shut off everything digital and read the paper over breakfast. And so I think sometimes it's like just choosing an outlet, and just sort of, if you don't want to actually do the paper thing, just like reading some outlet online and just sticking to that and not getting distracted by stuff all over the place can help, and then just going analog for the rest of the day or something. Or even, I mean, I'm a fan of Twitter. I think just kind of scrolling through for a limited amount of time, reading a couple of articles. Yeah, just finding whatever sort of works for you to discipline, because I think it's totally crazy making how bombarded we are with stuff all the time. So I think you just need to find times to shut it off.
Let me give her a hand. And say thank you. Everybody say thank you for her taking the time out to answer your questions and talk to you.